where I'm very proud to announce our next speaker. Hopefully I don't butcher the last name. I asked Ursula how to pronounce it. Felipe Larraín, close enough. He's the former finance minister in Chile, and he will talk about what is happening in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. This is my first conference on this topic, I must say, the digital currency. And you can tell if you look at me that I'm not a digital currency expert. You can tell by looking at my shoes. You know, I discovered a leading indicator of a digital currency expert is that you don't use shoes, you use sneakers. And particularly in general, I decided that it should be with some white in the sneakers, not completely black. But you know, that's just an observation. I have half an hour to discuss Latin America, and I will discuss about AI and the geopolitical conflict. Let me say, I've been a university professor for all my life, and for 2 periods, finance minister in my country. So that's my background. Happy to entertain any questions at the end if you have. So let's look at brief look at Latin America. 670 million people, 8% of the world population, 7 trillion GDP, 7% of world GDP, so close to the average of, slightly less than the average of world GDP per capita, and 23,000 at purchasing power parity. At market exchange rates, GDP per capita is about $10,000. So the difference between PPP, purchasing power parity, and market-based exchange rates. You have a very sharp contrast. I put here Switzerland as our host country. You can see here Brazil as the giant in the region with $2.2 trillion. Then you have Mexico. Switzerland will be on this scale third. Argentina, and we have very small countries, you know, over here. And of course, I'm not talking about the very small countries in the Caribbean, you know, islands, which are independent islands and have a very small populations and GDP, which is not big. In terms of GDP per capita, we have an interesting case. If we would have asked you which is the largest GDP per capita in Latin America, you wouldn't have guessed it's Guyana right now. Guyana with $80,000, $81,000. And the reason is that Guyana has few people and discovered huge reserves of oil, and they started production of oil. So Guyana is by far, then comes Panama, Uruguay, and Chile. You know, Chile was by 2012 was the number 1 GDP per capita in Latin America, but this is a mobile issue. You know, it moves because other countries grow faster in particular periods. We have entered a period of relatively slow growth in my country. We have poverty as one of the issues in several countries. Latin America's overall average poverty rate is 25.5. And you have countries where over half of the population are poor, are below the poverty line. And you have other countries in the bottom where less than 5% of the population is poor. So big contrasts in terms of poverty. We have also, this is an unequal region. In the map here, the darker you are on red, and this is based on the Gini coefficient. Some of you would have learned at some point. Would anybody here know about the Gini coefficient? Yes, okay. So you know it's based on the Lorentz curve in early 1900s. And you know, what we do here, this is an index which is between 0 and 1. 0 is everybody has the same income in the country. That's impossible. 1 is everybody has no income except for one person, which has all the income in the country. Well, 1 is also, well, you can say the Sultan of Brunei. Brunei may be close, but it's not so close. You know, 0.56 is the, so this is an unequal region. I put here Switzerland very close to the OECD average, 0.3. And you have the Latins here. all the Latins with the average being 0.45 and the most unequal being Colombia, Panama, Brazil, and here you have Uruguay, Mexico. Chile is about average on this region. This is one of the most unequal regions in the world. It's close to Africa in terms of inequality. And it has to do with many things, but some of them are inherited from the colonial times. When I don't know whether you knew, but we have the encomienda and the mayorazgo. These are two institutions. The mayorazgo means that the oldest in the family will inherit all the wealth. And the others will go to the army or to the church. So that was basically what happened, during a big period. And then the encomienda was huge extensions of land granted by the Spanish crown to the people who have served them well. So the combination of encomienda and mayorazgo produced very high income inequality. That is changing, but still it's relatively high. Informality. If I tell you, well, I'm here in Switzerland, I said, what percentage of the labor force in Switzerland is informal? What do you mean informal? Informal is guys who have no contract, they have no social security, they have no unemployment insurance. Well, those are only 17%. In Latin America, you have countries where over 80% of the population are informal. They go around, completely, they're ghosts in the economy, but they are part of the economy, but they have no insurance, no social insurance. But they don't pay taxes as well. Well, they pay indirect taxes. They don't pay direct taxes. So there's a huge issue in Latin America. You have Chile as the country with the lowest informality, but still slightly below 30% of the labor force is informal. Would you imagine, and this is one of the big issues in Latin America, bringing more of these people into the formal economy? Having them pay taxes, that's one of the reasons that we have relatively low tax bases, because we have a lot of informal people in the region. This is not a very popular thing for a government to say, well, what are you going to do with informality? They said, well, we will, deal with informality, but informality, reducing informality is really a long-term issue. It doesn't show immediately. So that's one of the reasons why governments don't pursue the reduction of informality as one of their goals in the campaign and so on. Plus that, as you see, if you say, I'm going to reduce informality, and you're in Bolivia, you're going to be after 80% of the labor force. So that may not be a good campaign issue. Latin America's main destinations, which are, well, not surprisingly, the US and China. But Latin America, this is a most recent updated partner share. You have, overall, all in all, you see the US is the biggest export partner in Latin America. But this changes very much if you go south. In Mexico, the US absorbs 80% of Mexican exports. So completely dependent on the US. But if you go south to Chile and Peru, two very similar economies, the US is the second trading partner, but the most important trading partner is China. And so something is happening in the south of Latin America. The China is gaining influence. This is very close to the land of Rafaela Carrà. Yes? Is that, you know Rafaela Carrà? What did she used to say? What did she used to say? She said, para hacer bien el amor hay que venir al sur. That's what she said. So please look at this famous song by Rafaela Carrà. So something is happening when you go south. And this is what's happening. And you have, look, Brazil is a country where 31% of the main country in Latin America, most important trading partner is China, not the US. And then you have countries, then the rest of the countries, and Uruguay also, So you have 4 countries in the southern tip of Latin America, or in the middle and southern part of the region, where the most important trading partner is China. Main challenges for the region. Well, let's say we have a challenging international environment, not just because of the war, but started with trade, rough waters on world trade. You probably remember Liberation Day, yes? Early April 2025. Well, it happened that the US right now has the world the highest tariffs in practically over a century. Since the 1930s, since the Great Depression of the 1930s, you don't have so high tariffs in the US as they have today. And this is not just an issue between China and the US. It's an issue between the US and most of its trading partners, and you know it well here in Europe. You know, we are trading partners of the US for a long time, and we have a trade agreement, a free trade agreement with the US, in spite of the fact that we have a standing agreement signed by both parties. We just got tariffs. We got 10% tariffs overnight, you know. And we're discussing, you know, the value of our trade agreement. But that's an issue. It's an issue for everyone. But of course, this is the bigger issue today. We already discussed a bit this. Let me just say a bit. The Strait of Hormuz. We already talked about the Strait of Hormuz. So the Middle East, as you know, the key role of the Middle East in the world economy, the Strait of Hormuz, 20 million barrels go through the Strait of Hormuz every day. So that's about 20% of the world production. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Well, they're discussing the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, but the negotiations right now are in a stalemate. Before coming here, I just looked, and President Trump just announced that any ship or group that was discovered laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz will be immediately shot and destroyed. He said that today. So there is an issue here that Saudi Arabia has a pipeline that goes to the Red Sea. You know that? Well, about 7 million barrels of those 20 million could go through the pipeline. But the pipeline was just bombed a few weeks ago by Iran. So this is a complicated situation. And you have, this is a very interesting thing, I think, on my view. Which are the 6 most important trade routes in the world? Well, the Panama Canal in Latin America, the Cape of Good Hope, the Strait of Malacca that goes to the China Sea. You know, all the cargo that goes to China goes through the Strait of Malacca. Then you have the Suez Canal going to Europe, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Has anyone been in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait here? No, I don't suggest you do so. Because here in South Yemen, which is the place where there are the Hutus, you know, this rebel group, or you know, that sends drones to the ships that are going through. So all the cargo, most of the cargo that was going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, going to Europe from this region and from Asia, part of those guys are going through the Cape of Good Hope, discovered by Bartolome Diaz in the late 1500s. Now, not just a historical issue from the economic point of view, this is very interesting, but this is increasing the costs of trade, of world trade. And then, of course, the Strait of Hormuz. So these are the 6 most important straits and canals in the world. And the Middle East holds over 50% of world oil reserves. But this may come to some of you as a shock to learn that the country with the highest reserves of oil in the world is Venezuela, not Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is second. And then you have other countries. This is just in terms of oil reserves. So you see, Venezuela, that has the highest level of world reserves and produces only less than 1% of world output of oil, only about 800,000 barrels of oil per day. So that's pretty slim. And that may explain, you know, based on my predecessor as a speaker here, well, why is the US going? Was that about democracy? Well, was that about oil? Well, President Trump was pretty blunt. He said, well, you know, the oil is ours. You know, and so going into the country, of course, it's not just getting the oil out of the ground. Venezuela at its peak would produce 3.5 million barrels a day, and now it's at 800,000. So a little bit is management, but a lot of it is investment in the oil facilities. So this is the situation in terms of production, in terms of reserves, but in terms of oil production, the biggest producer is the US, the second is Russia, the third is Saudi Arabia, and then the other countries. And a lot from the region. And, you know, natural gas. Natural gas is also very critical because although the US is the main producer of natural gas in the world, then Russia You have Iran, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So it's also a player in natural gas. It's also a player in fertilizers. So, I mean, you have three issues here, or at least three very important commodities that are affected by these. And then oil prices reached $100 per barrel. Just looked at it, and it's about there. It's about $100. Remember, it came down. It went to 110 here in the escalation of the war. The ceasefire brought it down to close to 90, but now it's at about 100. Let me make here one prediction, which is not great. I would like to say it's some other thing, but in the short to medium term, oil prices will not come down to about $65 a barrel, which is the level they had before. And why is this? The main reason, is that some of the oil facilities in the region have been damaged by the bombing. So there is big damage to the oil facilities. There is also increased risk in going, so insurance will be more costly. So even if we have peace, oil prices won't go back to the $65. Probably something between 80 and 90, but not 60. This implies, and you have here several countries in the region in very different situations. You have some big oil exporters, Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana. But you have most of Central America. You have Mexico also as an oil exporter, although not so important, but also, and you have Chile and Central America. In Chile, just to tell you, you may be in a similar position here, we produce less than 1%, about 1% of our consumption. That's the local production. So 99% comes imported from outside. And this is the evidence that a 10% increase in oil prices is estimated to raise world inflation by 0.2 percentage points. If you take, let's take a rough guess here. If 0.2 for every 10%, now we have about 60% increase, from 60, 65 to 100. Well, this means that we have about 1.2% higher inflation in the world if this continues. 1% is a good guess of a 1 percentage point increase in inflation. And what will happen to global GDP? The estimates are that the global GDP would fall by about 0.1% for every 10% increase. Interestingly, Latin America's will rise by 0.1. I will explain this. But the thing is, globally, this is a very bad situation. We will have about 0.5, 0.7% decline in growth. It doesn't mean a recession, but it means, a force that will be, dragging growth down. And in Latin America, the situation is different because, the region as a whole is an oil exporter. Although there are some countries which are less blessed with oil. We're blessed in Chile. I will discuss that later because it will be interesting for you. We're blessed with other commodities, but not with oil. And there is some new political winds in the region. There are several countries facing election or government changes. Costa Rica changed government in February 1st, going to a center-right politician. March 11, a new government in Chile. There's a government change with President Cast from the right. April 12th, that's Peru. The government change will happen in July 28. Well, Peru, the election was on April 12th, but they're still counting the votes. The votes are not being finished, the count, and it is likely that you will have a candidate from the right facing one from the left. We don't know what's going to happen. You have Colombia, also undecided. You have one guy who is close to Petro, and the other which is from the opposition to Petro, a lady senator, opposition to Petro. And then you have Brazil. And this is the big election of the year in Latin America. In October, President Lula will be facing Flavio Bolsonaro, the son of former President Jair Bolsonaro. And it's pretty tight, although the latest polls have given, an edge to Flavio Bolsonaro in Brazil. Interesting, because for a long time, Lula was leading the polls. But Lula is now over 80. Bolsonaro is young, the electorate, is looking. And there is no candidate that apparently will challenge these two. So the thing will be between the two Right now, the tide is going to Bolsonaro. So, a shift towards the center-right, yes. You have right or center-right governments in Argentina, Bolivia, Costa Rica, Chile, Ecuador, Paraguay, El Salvador, naming a few of the most important. Left of center, or left governments in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay. Changes here, Brazil and Colombia. Brazil and Colombia will have changed. We don't know where this will go, but this is, why is it an issue? It's an issue because the policies are different, you know. In Latin America, at least, it may not be the case in other countries. Latin America will be more center-right governments are more market-friendly, are tougher on immigration, and are tougher on security issues. So I think that those would be the main issues of a tied towards the center-right in Latin America. There are plenty of challenges in this region, while time is running out. First of all, we cannot forget Latin America was the hardest hit region, was hardest hit from the pandemic. 7% decline in 2020. And then we have been trailing the world. We have been trailing as a region, growing at around, if you take the last 2 decades, growing at around 2%, declining growth from the previous 2 decades, while the world has been growing at 3 or over 3%. So we're trailing in terms of growth. Artificial intelligence development, that's a very interesting issue. I will mention and I will show to you the only index that I know of AI usage, adoption, and investment. We have the region with 3 main players which are at the top of the region. Chile, Brazil, and Uruguay lead in AI readiness and adoption. And we have 3 groups of countries: pioneers, adopters, and early stage ecosystems. Over 1/3 of countries remain at the very early stage. I'll show you in a moment. There are some structural constraints. AI talent and research are concentrated in a few countries. Limited investment. We have 7%, remember, the first figure, 7% of global GDP, but only 1.1% of AI investment. We have relatively weak infrastructure and computing capacity outside the leading markets. This is the ILIA. ILIA stands for the Índice Latinoamericano de Inteligencia Artificial, so the Artificial Intelligence Index for Latin America. You have from 70 in Chile to 25 in Venezuela, so huge gaps. But this is I'm not saying this is this is a work of an institution in Chile, close to Universidad Católica, close to the center I run, which is CLAPES-UC. We are doing projects together with Senia, produce this. I'm not saying it's a perfect index, but it's an interesting index. So you can look which countries have more advanced AI and which are less so. But I will end my presentation with an optimistic note. Because in spite of the fact that we have all these issues, which we all have particular issues which may be similar or different, we have many interesting opportunities. By the way, this is a picture of Santiago, my home. So when I see opportunities, I look at my city, and this is the highest tower, I think, in South America. Okay, this is the tower of a company called Cencosud. Anyway, let me say, this is a region very rich in the resources the world needs most. 60% of global lithium reserves are in Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia are called the triangle of lithium. Let me say something which to me is kind of perplexing. It's perplexing that the highest reserves are in Bolivia. So Bolivia is the country in the world with the highest reserves of lithium, yet it has almost no production, insignificant production of lithium. Argentina and Chile are producing lithium. This is a region where we have in Chile and Peru 40% of the global copper production. We are a major suppliers of food and agricultural commodities. And we have high potential in renewable energy, in solar, wind, and hydro. Let me show you a particular example of what has happened with this from my country, Chile. What is our role in the energy transition with these capabilities that we have? We have solar radiations in particular places which are extremely high. We have big potential in wind, we have big potential in thermal. Look at this. This is, to us, one of our main achievements in Chile. In a very short period of time, we went from a dominance of this is fossil fuel based generation to solar and wind generation. So solar plus wind and a little of thermal now exceed by far fossil fuel generation by 70 to 30. The 2025 data will probably reinforce this trend because this is a continuing trend. This is a path. We have signed, as several countries have signed, the COP16 agreement in which we have committed to be carbon neutral by 2050. Well, the way to become carbon neutral is to, one important way, is to reconvert your energy matrix. This is what's happening. Chile is probably the most extreme case of conversion, but there are other countries in the region which have also converged. Let me, just for a minute, regional integration as a strategic opportunity. You're here in Europe, and we regard, of course, Switzerland is not part of the EU, but the EU is a very ambitious trade agreement. It's much more than a trade agreement, it's a union. We have not been able to get a trade agreement that encompasses the whole region in Latin America. So this is something, and I just worked on this project and I published a paper, suggested that we cannot be so ambitious to think that we can become the European Union, but we can look to Asia, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is a very interesting agreement that is not a huge centrally based institutions, but we have institutional frameworks who have supported integration, investment, and with global competitiveness. We have many agreements in Latin America which have all these problems. We have Mercosur, we have the Andean Community, we have the CARICOM, we have you name it. We have the Andean Pact, you have the Pacific Alliance, and we haven't been able to create a region with integration, with enough integration. So this is a big challenge for our region. Nearshoring. Nearshoring, if you get reshoring is not an opportunity. But nearshoring is, meaning the companies that are, let's say you are in Asia or are in the Middle East and you may be wanting to come back, but you don't come back. Maybe you don't come back. If you come back to your home country, that's not nearshoring. Nearshoring is when you come back closer, because that's reshoring. And reshoring will not bring us many opportunities. But if you come back, and I will argue that Latin America's advantage is huge, is big, to attract part of this investment which is coming back to outside the cheapest places and the most efficient places in the world, but we have with the geopolitical issues. And which countries are more attractive as nearshoring destinations? Let me just say that we built an index, a couple of years ago, and we have here Uruguay, Chile, Costa Rica, and Brazil. The paradox, of course, as you will say, is that Mexico, which in this index we have logistics, rule of law, political stability, property rights respect, and financial development. We put together all these things and come with this list. Yet the country that is benefiting most from nearshoring is Mexico. And Mexico is just, the reason is that Mexico is so close to the US. You know that what Porfirio Diaz, the Mexican president, used to say in the 19th century, said, poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the US. But this this has been Mexico has the advantage here. But the whole point that we're making is there are many other countries which are not so close, but there are many other variables that companies will consider, among them those 5 that we considered for this index. And in that index, the reality is different. AI offers a very unique opportunity to accelerate growth and convergence. The good news is that, yes, we're starting from very small, but the AI market in Latin America is growing at nearly 30% annually. That's a huge growth rate. Even if you're starting small, that's the way to grow. That's the way to become, to penetrate. AI can transform productivity and growth. Some recent research, 8 to 14% of jobs could see significant productivity gains. High openness to AI across the population, and firms are investing in upskilling their workers. So there is an opportunity here. And let me say one thing, which is, because I know this is not an issue only for our region. It's an issue for the whole world. We are concerned what will happen in labor markets with AI. Because AI will enhance competitiveness, but it will replace jobs. Let me just say, we don't know what will happen. We are right in the middle of the revolution, but let me say 2 things. AI will destroy jobs and will create jobs. So far, all the technological revolutions in the world have been net job creators, not job destructors. Not net. So even the industrial revolution created many more jobs, but some jobs were outdated. So this is a good news, but the second part of the story is that you have to take care of those who become displaced by the AI revolution. Okay, so because those guys who will vote for populists, they will get one guy that say, well, our problem is, unfair competition from abroad, then immigration and so on, and then you got the more populist side. So it's I think a country will not only, and a government, public policy should look at training, conversion of skills. I think that's very important. And let me finish with this. And I think tourism. Let me say tourism because Latin America is not a big player in tourism. We have only one country which it ranks among the global top 10 tourist destinations, which is Mexico. But here you have Machu Picchu in Peru. And this is my own bias, you can say, yes, this is Torres del Paine in Chile. So 100 places to see before you die. This is one, Torres del Paine. So I suggest you at least see these 2, because they're very important. And I think there's also another issue, that tourism has been relocating. And the relocation we're already seeing, I'm working currently with the government of Dominican Republic, and some of you may have gone to Casa de Campo, resort, or and they're seeing an increase in tourism, recently, because there is tourism relocation in the world. So yes, we have issues, we have problems, but there are, many opportunities, and I am optimistic about the future of my region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe. I have one question from my side. Why did Chile not qualify for the World Cup?
We had interesting. You touch a nerve here, because I was for 5 years board member, director of Universidad Católica Soccer Club, which is one of the most prominent. We have Colo-Colo, Católica, and Universidad de Chile. These are the top 3. So I was very moved when I saw the presentation about the Barça this morning, about that soccer and the World Cup. Why didn't we had our golden generation, and some of you may know some of the players of the golden generation, Arturo Vidal, Gary Medel, and so on. But then these guys went, and they're already on the late 30s now playing in Chile, and we didn't have the replacement generation. We may have done things not so well, but this was a very poor showing. We finished, I I say with sadness, we finished last in the last qualification for in South America for the World Cup.
So good luck next time.
Yes.
Any other questions, please?
Thank you for your presentation. As I was looking at your region, namely the Chile, recently, because it's now one of the top destinations for the digital nomads, for the people who work basically online, and they're not connected to any physical location, so they just take a laptop and this is their basically work. So a lot of the people move to the Chile. You described the structure of economy of the whole region, and I believe your intention was to invite, visit, maybe invest into the countries. Is that correct, or what was the purpose of getting this?
Well, there are two things, I think. Of course, to invite, to invest, but also to try to do a good analysis of the region and an objective as far as I can, because that was the objective, to show you many of you may not know much about Latin America. And what I was saying, there are lots of opportunities there.
I agree. Thank you. So the question number one, since we're in Switzerland, it's obvious that a lot of the good stuff that we see around of here is, first, relatively low taxes and very good working, well, relatively to the rest of the world, government in general. So the structures here actually work. This is unfortunately not the case for the developing countries. I come from Ukraine, I know that for sure. So taxes are horrible, and don't trust the government. That's just in essence. I believe very similar thing is happening in Latin America, at least from the friends that I have. They invested into not Chile, but different countries, namely Brazil and Uruguay. And what they had eventually, it depends when it comes, yeah. So, but the people will come, approach you, namely they're like related somehow to the government, and they say, okay, you're successful, now you have to share, or give the 100% of your company. Unfortunately, this is the case. So, what's your insight of maybe AI can solve this problem, and then the governance, there's a good word for that, governance, will improve in your countries, or what are the opportunities? I mean, because right now, I mean, there are much more interesting places in the world and more secure than just going to the, like Brazil, for example, the biggest market. I mean, it's physically not safe to walk around the streets. So, what's your thought on how can the AI maybe improve this, or any reforms might happen in Chile soon that, liberalize the taxes?
Well, we're seeing a movement after the governments that were in place for the last several years in the region. We're seeing a movement towards a reduction in at least in corporate taxation, which is a very important part of it. We are seeing, for example, some interest in particularly my country, but also in other countries in the region, to become a financial center, at least a regional center, a place where you can raise capital for those companies that cannot go to the US, because if you do an emission in the US, you issue stock and you try to do an IPO in the US, if you go with less than 500 million, then probably won't be worth it. Well, in our market, you can go with 100 million. So I'm seeing and I'm seeing a role for AI in helping at least in two issues. One broad issue in Latin America is what you would call it here a red tape. We call it permisología, which means that all the permits go to do a project, go to different offices and services, and these people take a lot of time with no consequence, take a lot of time to respond. And now we had a recent law passed in my country that you're replacing permits with declarations that under oath. You do under oath, you declare, and if you discover that you're cheating, then huge problem. But this replaces permits. The other thing is what you call the positive administrative silence, meaning that if you go to the period, let's say there's a limit, a legal limit of 6 months for a permit, and if you reach the limit and there is no answer, then it's a yes. Okay? If you reach the limit, that's what it called positive administrative silence. So the silence means a yes. I see a role for AI in several things. In productivity, but in particular in two issues. In reducing red tape. If you use more AI at the level of the government, you'll be able to reduce the time for the permits. And I think using AI is also an issue in the fight against crime, which is and the fight, by the way, a fight against crime, which is increasing in some places, in my own country, but let me give you a statistic. You find countries in Latin America where you have 40 murders per 100,000 people a year. In Chile we have 6, okay? But still, that's been growing. But if you have cooperation among the different, police forces in the countries, and if you have AI put into it and you follow the money, you may be able to fight crime better. So those are two examples where I think we can do better by using AI.
Thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting. Thank you for the applause. I can relate. Yeah, I can relate very much to what you said about football. I have Italian origin, so we can support each other after with a drink. No, the question is about the energy mix of Chile. I didn't know about that. It's quite interesting to see, and also AI adoption in Chile. And the two things goes very well together because we know that data centers requires a lot of energy to compute. What are the opportunities in Chile in that regards, in terms of, let's say, getting a kind of a data center hub for Latin America?
Well, I put this, thank you for the question. I put this figure here because I think this shows that you would be looking, if you look to a place, well, you look at, of course, taxation, just as about taxation in the place. Second, Chile, by the way, is one of the countries that have the widest web of double non-taxation agreements. So that's another issue. You go to a country and whatever taxes you pay are credit in your home country. And there are many other countries in the region which are doing this. But look here, logistics, the rule of law, political stability, and property right respect and financial development. These kind of things you will look at if you go. And I think those are good arguments to go to Uruguay, Chile, Costa Rica, Brazil, Panama, and depending on where you want to locate on that list. I think there are other issues. I didn't mention green hydrogen. One of the countries, although there's still some discussion, but if you want to be a producer of green hydrogen, which is hydrogen with clean energy. That's basically what green hydrogen is. But for example, if you want to produce copper and you produce it with green hydrogen rather than just hydrogen, you will have an advantage. Because here in the EU, for example, there is a tariff based on the carbon content that is starting to be placed. So if you're producing with cleaner energy, you will have an advantage when you go to the markets that will tax the carbon content. So I think that's another issue. Not to mention, many other things which are in the region, reach of natural resources. I happened to be to give a conference in Bolivia about 10 days ago, and Bolivia is one of the countries that has, it has the lithium I mentioned. It has a lot of solar energy, and you could produce a lot, but you need to have the rules of investment, long-term rules, the institutional background for an investor to go. So I think there are many, many issues that I could mention, and of course around those sectors. Mining is very important in several of our countries, particularly in the south. Around mining, you have a lot of service industries. a lot of service industries. So, sure.
Felipe, let's assume I would be considering, moving down there. And so I look at these lists and I see Uruguay number 1, I see Chile number 2, and so can you give me some reasons why I should go to Chile, not to Uruguay?
Sure.
Why not Uruguay?
Because 4,200 kilometers of coastline, the longest country in the world, from the deserts in the north to the Antarctica. And actually the difference is not so much, it's just 0.1. So I would suggest you go to Chile, a bigger market, and we are, when we say this is just a joke, and we say, and we are separated by a big cordillera from Argentina. That's another reason. But anyway.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the talk.